Every case has turning points. And in this one, investigators say they uncovered not just digital traces, but something far more personal. A voice message saved on a device, and a handwritten note tucked away beneath a computer keyboard. Both, prosecutors claim, spoke directly to intent. Both, they argue, revealed a state of mind that cannot be ignored. But the story doesn't stop there. According to newly released court filings, those words were not left in isolation. Messages were also sent to someone much closer. A roommate described in reports as transitioning, who was living in the same apartment. Those private exchanges, prosecutors allege, contain requests to hide conversations, delete evidence, and understand what had just unfolded. For investigators, this is not background noise. This is the narrative they believe shows preparation, planning, and concealment. And tonight, we're not retelling the beginning of who Charlie Kirk was. We're stepping straight into the evidence room to examine the note, the voice message, and the text exchanges prosecutors are now placing at the very center of their case. What do these discoveries really reveal? Do they prove motive and premeditation? Or do they leave unanswered questions about state of mind, influence, and intent? This is where the case begins to move from speculation to documented evidence. And it's here in these messages and notes that the story takes a chilling new turn. But before we dive into this, kindly subscribe to our channel Detective Max if you believe in fighting for justice. Because every view, every comment, every subscriber is a stand against silence and a step toward justice. So go ahead and drop your fingerprints on that subscribe button and definitely where you're watching from. This is not a retelling of the entire event. This update begins where the latest court filings begin, with what investigators say they found inside an apartment. A handwritten note concealed beneath a keyboard. A voice message saved on a personal device, and a series of text exchanges with a roommate, a partner who, according to reporting, is transitioning. Each of these pieces of evidence is now being cited by prosecutors as more than background detail. They say the note speaks to intent. The voice message points to state of mind, and the messages to the roommate provide context for what happened before and after the incident. In this report, we'll step carefully through those elements, not to sensationalize them, but to ask, what do they actually show? How do they fit together in the timeline prosecutors are constructing? And most importantly, how do these discoveries affect the direction of the case moving forward? Prosecutors say a handwritten note was discovered beneath the keyboard inside the apartment. According to charging materials summarized in recent reporting, this note contained language they interpret as intent and planning. The exact words remain sealed or heavily redacted, but prosecutors describe its essence as outlining a fixed plan, not a spontaneous reaction. They argue that this placement under the keyboard was no accident. Hidden from plain sight, but still accessible, it could signal an attempt to conceal or a kind of personal record intended to be found later. From a legal perspective, this is critical. Courts often distinguish between acts that are impulsive and those that are premeditated. A note, written and left behind, shifts the argument. It introduces the idea of preparation, something done in advance, with forethought. Prosecutors say this supports their claim of premeditation. Defense attorneys, however, may argue that the note reflects turmoil, stress, or even a cry for help, rather than clear, deliberate planning. In either case, the note is no longer just a private piece of paper. It has become a central exhibit in the legal process. On screen, imagine a plain notebook graphic, pages blank, with the word allege clearly marked across the top. Slowly zooming in on the page reinforces the idea that this is not about dramatization, but about evidence. Evidence that will be tested in court. Investigators also report recovering a voice message from a device inside the apartment. According to charging documents and court filings, prosecutors summarize this message as giving insight into the accused's state of mind immediately after the incident. The full recording has not been released publicly, but prosecutors describe it as significant because of what it appeared to convey. In cases like this, a voice message can serve many roles. It might express regret. It could sound defiant. It could attempt to justify actions, or even offer instructions to someone else. The interpretation depends heavily on tone, wording, and context, all of which will be debated in court. For the legal process, the importance lies in timing. A voice message recorded in the moments directly surrounding an event may be treated as an unfiltered reflection of thought and intent. Prosecutors will likely argue that it supports their version of the timeline. Defense attorneys may challenge how it is interpreted, or argue that stress, shock, or confusion influenced what was said. On screen, viewers could see a neutral waveform animation, accompanied by blurred or redacted text, labeled clearly as paraphrased from charging document. To avoid speculation, only the summarized meaning should be displayed, not direct quotes that have not been publicly verified. For sound design, a simple, short neutral tone, like a bleep, can be used before the paraphrase is read aloud. This creates atmosphere without reproducing words that are not yet public record. At this stage, the voice message is not evidence the public has heard firsthand. It exists within filings, described by prosecutors, and awaiting further examination in open court. Central to the newly described exchanges is the roommate, identified in reporting as the accused's romantic partner, and described by officials as transitioning. Prosecutors say this individual received several text messages that are now being introduced as part of the evidence record. According to charging documents, these messages allegedly included explanations of motive, requests to delete prior conversations, and details connected to the retrieval of a weapon. Prosecutors argue that this shows not only communication, but an attempt to shape how events would be understood afterward. It is important to emphasize, however, that the roommate has not been charged with any crime. Officials and multiple outlets report that this person has cooperated with investigators and provided access to the communications in question. Their role as it stands is not that of a participant, but as a source of evidence. For viewers, this distinction matters. In the prosecution's narrative, the texts are central because they help outline timing, planning, and state of mind. For the defense, they may become a point of challenge, questioning interpretation, context, or emotional tone. Based on the materials prosecutors have outlined publicly, here is the working timeline investigators are using. According to charging documents and court briefings, the sequence appears as follows. Planning period, days before. Officials allege that in the days leading up to the event, the accused discussed intentions in messages that prosecutors say revealed motive and preparation. Alleged retrieval of rifle. Charging papers describe an instance where the accused is said to have retrieved a firearm from a prearranged location. Investigators reference this step as part of their argument for advanced planning. Note placement. Within the apartment, investigators report finding a handwritten note. According to filings, this document contains statements prosecutors interpret as tied to intent. The event itself, while specifics are left to trial, officials place the central incident at this point in the timeline. Prosecutors frame it as the culmination of earlier planning stages. Voice message and texts afterward. Filings describe a recorded message left by the accused, along with follow-up texts to the roommate. Prosecutors argue that these communications captured immediate reaction and instructions, roommate cooperation. Finally, investigators say the roommate provided access to the messages. This step, officials emphasize, gave them a clearer view of sequence and motive, forming part of the case presented in court. Each of these points remains under review, and all are labeled alleged until the trial determines their weight and credibility. For viewers, a neutral way to see this is as a structured chain of events, not a conclusion, but a roadmap of how prosecutors are presenting their narrative. Prosecutors have framed motive as rooted in political and identity-based grievances. According to charging documents and courtroom statements, they point to the defendant's own alleged messages, where he wrote about having enough of the hate. Officials argue that this phrasing, when paired with the chosen target, ties the act directly to the victim's public profile and statements. But as in any high-stakes case, motive is never presented as a single unquestioned truth. The prosecution's reading emphasizes ideology. The defense, however, could present alternative interpretations. They may argue the accused's mental state clouded intent. They may suggest coercion, external pressures, or even that the messages are open to different readings when placed in full context. The implications are substantial. Prosecutors link motive to aggravating factors, which could influence sentencing or eligibility for the most serious penalties under state law. On the other hand, defense attorneys often counter by shifting the focus to mental health considerations, arguing that capacity and judgment must be weighed alongside intent. In short, what's on the record right now is a tug-of-war between two frames: the prosecution's claim of deliberate, ideology-driven planning, and the defense's potential strategy of undermining intent, pointing instead to instability or diminished capacity. How a jury receives these narratives could decide not just the outcome, but the severity of consequences. Beyond the messages and the handwritten note, prosecutors say physical and forensic evidence ties the accused more directly to the scene. Charging documents describe DNA identified on a towel, along with items connected to the weapon. In addition, surveillance footage reportedly places an individual matching the accused's description on the campus around the critical time frame. On their own, any one of these elements could be argued as circumstantial. But prosecutors emphasize how they fit together: digital communications, written notes, DNA traces, and video all converging to build a consistent sequence. In legal terms, this strengthens the chain of evidence, the effort to move from suspicion toward proof. Forensic links, while technical, carry significant weight in the courtroom. Jurors often view them as objective, compared to testimony or interpretation. That's why both sides will focus heavily here, the state presenting the evidence as confirmation, and the defense examining every step of how samples were collected, stored, and tested. The combined picture, messages, note, DNA, and surveillance, is what prosecutors are preparing to place before a jury as the backbone of their case. News outlets have identified the roommate only in general terms. Both prosecutors and reporters stress the same point: the roommate is not charged with any crime, and has cooperated fully with investigators. Yet because their messages are central to how prosecutors frame the timeline, the roommate has inevitably become a focus in public conversation. That raises an important issue: privacy and safety for third parties who are not accused of wrongdoing. When reporting mentions that the roommate is transgender, responsible journalists remind audiences that such details, if handled carelessly, can open the door to harassment or unwanted exposure. Ethical practice demands restraint, avoiding unnecessary disclosure, resisting speculation, and protecting individuals who are witnesses rather than suspects. For producers, outlets, and audiences alike, the guiding principle is clear: do not amplify personal details that could endanger or stigmatize those on the periphery of a case. That means blurring faces in footage, avoiding names unless officially part of filings, and steering away from doxing or personal attacks. Ultimately, the roommate's role is evidentiary, not criminal. And in politicized cases like this, remembering the line between accused and cooperating witness is essential to fair, responsible coverage. What comes next in this case will unfold in stages. The immediate phase involves pretrial proceedings, hearings where both sides set the ground rules. Discovery is key here. Prosecutors are required to turn over the evidence they intend to use, while the defense can begin filing motions to suppress or exclude certain pieces. Competency or mental health evaluations may also be ordered. These determine not guilt or innocence, but whether the accused is fit to stand trial and participate in their own defense. Another development to watch is the state's stated intention to pursue aggravated charges, which elevates the potential consequences if a conviction is reached. This could shape how both sides argue over motive, planning, and mental state. Viewers should keep an eye out for 3 major milestones: a detailed indictment expanding on the charging documents already filed, any released transcripts of the note, texts, or voice message if the court unseals them, defense filings challenging whether specific pieces of evidence, such as DNA, messages, or surveillance, are admissible. Each of these steps will shape the contours of the trial and signal where the most intense disputes are likely to arise. These pieces, the note, the voice message, the texts to a partner, form the core of what prosecutors say shows this was not spontaneous. But the courtroom is where every word, every piece of evidence will be tested. As this case moves forward, hearings and filings will determine how much of that picture is ultimately presented to a jury. We'll continue to follow each stage, and when transcripts or documents are unsealed, we'll break them down carefully, source by source. If you'd like us to create a full evidence breakdown once those materials are public, let us know in the comments below. Your feedback guides what we cover next.